She never doubted herself once, not until the night her younger sister said yes, and suddenly everything she had been hesitating about collapsed into something she could not name. There were two sisters, nearly the same age, navigating the same unfamiliar territory. Two young men, two uncertain futures, the quiet pressure of a world that expected them to decide. The elder was the kind of person who felt everything too much and moved too slowly because of it. She wavered. She went weeping to her mother more than once, unable to say whether she loved him, unable to say whether she didn't. The younger sister, more decisive by nature, simply made up her mind and accepted her suitor. And that was it. The situation resolved for one of them, cleanly, the way a door closes when someone finally chooses to walk through it. What happened next was small but irreversible. The elder sister's admirer, hearing the news, rushed to her with sudden urgency, pressing for an answer he had been waiting too long to receive. His desperation should have moved her. Instead, it irritated her. She answered coolly, almost dismissively, and when he responded with sharp words, she answered even more sharply. There was a scene. He left. His mother told him to find someone else. And somewhere in the aftermath, in the strange silence that followed, the elder sister began convincing herself that the quarrel had simply revealed the truth, that she had never really loved him at all. It was easier to believe that than to look at what she had actually done. From that point, something shifted in her. She grew moody and withdrawn. The warmth she had once shown her parents curdled into sullenness, and some weeks into weeks of flat gray depression. Her relationship with her younger sister, the one who had done nothing wrong, who had simply been decisive, became shadowed by something neither of them could quite address directly. The elder sister bristled when her sister's name came up. She found reasons to be elsewhere. And while her sister's wedding was being celebrated, she herself was at a distant health resort, being treated for a physical ailment that had no clear physical cause. She was not sick in any way a doctor could easily locate. But something inside her was consuming itself, turning inward, finding no exit. She would not call it jealousy. She would not call it anything. That was perhaps the most important detail. Not what she felt, but what she refused to see. The question she never asked herself hung in the air around her like weather. What was this feeling actually about, and who was it really for? The feeling was about her, and it was for her. Not for her sister, not for the man who had left, not for the wedding being celebrated somewhere she had chosen not to be. The elder sister's body had taken on a sickness that no physician could locate because the real disturbance was not in her stomach or her nerves. It was in the gap between what she felt and what she was willing to admit she felt. Everything happening inside her had gone looking for an exit and found only the body, which held it the only way the body knows how, as pain. What she was carrying was not a mood. It was not a bad season or a run of unfortunate events. It was something older and more organized than that. A feeling-toned complex around jealousy is a cluster of memories and wounds that share a single emotional key. The moment that key is struck, the whole chord sounds at once, and you're no longer responding to what's in front of you, but to everything that ever hurt you the same way. The elder sister's younger sister had not wronged her. She had simply been decisive, simply said yes, simply moved forward, and in doing so, she had struck that key. Every prior moment the elder sister had ever felt too slow, too uncertain, too much in her own way came forward at once, not as memory, as sensation, as a body that refused to attend a wedding. The complexity of this is important to sit with, because from the outside, it looked like jealousy of a simple kind. Older sister envies younger sister's happiness. But that reading is too clean. It misses what was actually being projected. Jealousy works like a projector left running in a dark room. The images playing on the wall come from a reel inside you, not from what's outside. But the screen is convincing enough that you forget there was ever a machine. The elder sister was not watching her sister. She was watching a screen. And on that screen was the life she might have chosen, the man she had dismissed too quickly, the certainty she had never been able to locate in herself. She projected outward the ache she could not own, and then suffered as if the source of that ache were external, as if the wound were something being done to her from outside. This is the move that jealousy always makes, and it is almost never seen in the moment. The unconscious is the vast room behind the one you're standing in. You cannot see into it, but everything it contains has weight, and that weight shows up in your reactions before you've had a single thought. The elder sister had no access to what was running in that back room. She knew only that she bristled when her sister's name was mentioned, that she found reasons to be elsewhere, that her body staged a quiet collapse at the precise moment it was asked to witness someone else's happiness. She did not connect these things. She could not. What the unconscious carries, it carries in the dark. And what it was carrying for her was the truth she had sealed off with a haughty dismissal, that she had wanted him, that she had been afraid, and that her coolness in the final scene was not revelation, but cowardice. There is a woman who loves her husband so little that she becomes jealous of everything he has that isn't hers, jealous of his friendships, his attention, his connections to the world. She wants to own him entirely because she is not actually with him. The kernel of all jealousy is lack of love, not lack of love for the other person, lack of love for the life you've refused. The elder sister was not jealous of her sister's happiness. She was jealous of what she herself had refused to take. This is why the shadow in jealousy is everything you have not yet allowed yourself to want. The shadow being like a second self that exists in the background, carrying all the qualities you have disowned or refused to acknowledge, the ambitions you decided you weren't allowed to have, the qualities you admire in others because you secretly believe you don't possess them. Her sister's decisiveness was not something the elder sister hated. It was something she had told herself she did not need, could not have, was not the kind of person to possess. And when that quality appeared, walking freely in someone close to her, what rose in her was not contempt. It was recognition, immediately suppressed. We are almost never jealous of real people. We are jealous of the portrait we've painted of them inside ourselves, the private version we have constructed from our own longing and fear. There was a man once who fell deeply for a woman, and when she married someone else, he could not hold that rival's name in his mind. He had known the man for years, had done business with him, and still, again and again, he forgot his name, had to ask others to remind him when he needed to write. This was not carelessness. A jealousy complex is like a bruise that has learned to think. It remembers every time you were made to feel small, keeps that record carefully, and activates it fully the moment someone else's success gets close enough to touch. That rival could not be a person. To be a person, he would have had to be real. And if he was real, then the loss was real. The complex would not allow that, so it kept him as a symbol of defeat and nothing more, nameless and abstract, a shape on a screen in a dark room. The elder sister's screen was running the same kind of images, not her sister's face, not her sister's husband, something more interior than that, the portrait she had built inside herself of what it would mean to have chosen, to have said yes, to have loved without hesitation. That portrait was not her sister, it was herself, in a life she had flinched away from, and the projector had been running long before the wedding, long before the scene at the door, probably long before she ever met him. The question is not who put the reel in the machine. The question is what is actually on it. What is on the reel is not a memory of a specific person or a single wound. It is a worldview, a fixed conviction about what you are allowed to have and what is already beyond your reach. Once a jealousy complex comes fully alive, it does not need new evidence. It generates its own. Every neutral event in the environment gets pulled into its orbit and reclassified. A casual text message becomes proof. A silence becomes confirmation. A half smile at a party becomes a thread that, once pulled, seems to unravel everything. This is not irrationality. It is the complex doing exactly what complexes do. They are not passive collections of feeling. They are active structures that reach into incoming experience and bend it to fit the shape they already have. The elder sister did not simply notice her sister's happiness and feel a pang. The complex inside her did something more organized than that. It took everything available, the wedding invitation, the absence of her own certainty, the warmth in her mother's voice when she spoke of the younger daughter, and folded it all into the same single conclusion. The world began to confirm what the inner life had already decided. This is how the loop closes, and why it closes so tightly. The ego, the part of you that shows up to work, plans the week, and manages the normal business of being a person, is no match for a complex that has been building for years. The ego has schedules and intentions, and the reasonable hope that if it thinks clearly enough, it will eventually land on the right answer. The complex has something older and more ruthless, a selective attention that operates faster than thought, below the reach of intention, and with no interest in being corrected. By the time the elder sister was sitting at the distant health resort, convincing herself she had simply been unwell, the complex had already been doing this work for months. Every reference to her sister's contentment had gone through this filter first. She was not receiving reality. She was receiving the replica of her own unknown face. That phrase matters, the replica of your own unknown face. Projection does not feel like projection. You do not experience it as something you have cast outward and then encountered in a stranger. You experience it as the world showing its true character. When the man who forgot his rival's name believed that rival had stolen something from him, he was entirely serious. When the elder sister bristled at her sister's name, there was no moment of internal recognition, no flash of awareness that what she was reacting to was her own unlived certainty. There was only the feeling, which felt external, which felt like something being done to her. This is what projection does. It isolates you from the actual situation and replaces it with a drama you are already starring in. The more it operates, the less of the real world you can reach. What you call vigilance is, in practice, avoidance. You are watching the screen so intently that the actual room, the actual person, the actual relationship happening right in front of you never becomes visible. There is a man who stops loving his wife, not through any dramatic rupture, but through the slow, quiet erosion that happens when a life has been lived next to someone rather than with them. The love does not disappear. Emotion of that depth and duration does not simply end. It goes underground. It becomes subliminal. And from the realm of the unconscious, it can only resurface in a distorted form, bent by the pressure of what suppressed it. He did not set out to become jealous. He set out to protect himself from the vertigo of admitting that he had stopped caring. And jealousy was the only bridge the unconscious could build back toward the feeling he had buried. His jealousy was not about his wife. It was not about any other man. It was the return of a love that had gone subliminal and could no longer travel in its original form. It came back through the back door, wearing the mask of its opposite. He accused her of withdrawing her love while withdrawing his own. He monitored her because he could no longer feel toward her. The jealousy was genuine. The thing it was made of was not. A power complex underneath jealousy is the hidden conviction that love is scarce and finite. A power complex being like an invisible hand on the scale, tipping every interaction toward contest and scarcity. And that conviction makes monitoring the other person feel like the only rational response to the threat. You can see this conviction operating at every scale. It is in the elder sister's inability to simply celebrate her sibling without experiencing it as a subtraction from herself. It is in the man who forgets his rival's name because to name him would be to acknowledge that the rival is a person, which would mean he has his own interior life, his own legitimate claim, his own reality, and a scarcity model cannot survive that acknowledgement. It is even in the oldest and most mythologized version of this pattern, the most powerful figure in all of human mythology, a figure of such overwhelming force that no earthly threat could have meaningfully challenged him, was still the most jealous presence in any story ever told, not because he was threatened from without, because he was threatened from within. The pattern there is the same one operating in the man at the health resort, and in the elder sister at the health resort, and in anyone who has ever spent months constructing a case against another person they were supposedly watching for safety. He projected onto Job the skeptical, questioning face that was his own, the face of doubt, of interior uncertainty, the part of himself he could not integrate. He was afraid of that face. The cannonade of his power, his declarations of omnipotence, his whole apparatus of wrath, All of it was a response to something within himself that he had cast outward and then magnified on another person until it seemed large enough to justify the fury. His jealous wrath was a form of self-persecution conducted at someone else's expense. He did not know this. That is the structure of projection. You do not know. You meet what you have sent. The mechanism is the same at every scale. You accuse the other of what you overlook in yourself. The cause you find in the other person is always an unconscious content in yourself that has been cast outward and then inflated, made large enough, threatening enough, real-looking enough to justify the reaction it provoked. The elder sister was not responding to her sister. She was responding to the courage she had sealed off inside herself and could not bear to see moving freely in someone close. She could have interrupted the entire sequence by asking a different question at any point. Not, what is she doing? Not, what does he want? Not, why is everyone celebrating something I was too afraid to take? The question that would have changed the trajectory, the only one that touches the actual machine, is, what am I not looking at? She never asked it. That is not a moral failure. It is a description of how the loop is built. The complex assimilates the environment. Projection locks the loop closed. The paranoid logic follows as naturally as weather follows a pressure change, and the unconscious routes the suppressed feeling back as its opposite. Jealousy in place of love, wrath in place of uncertainty, illness in place of grief. You can run this loop for decades and never once touch the thing driving it, because the loop itself is a mechanism for not touching it. Every act of monitoring the other person is a step away from the interior. Every piece of evidence you collect is another reason not to look inward. The paranoia feels like attention. It is, in practice, the most efficient form of avoidance ever constructed. She spent years being sick rather than asking a single real question. The question that would have changed everything is not, what is she doing? It is, what am I not looking at? And the reason that question is so rarely asked, the reason the complex can run for decades untouched, is that to ask it is to suspend the projection, even for a moment, and let the feeling come back without an external cause attached to it, which means feeling it fully, without a screen, without a story about someone else to hold it at a distance. The loop is not closed by force. It is closed by the fact that the alternative is too uncomfortable to approach without something to help you stay there, which raises the only question that matters now. If the mechanism is this complete, if the complex assimilates, the projection seals it, the paranoia follows, and the feeling returns as its opposite, what could possibly interrupt it? You stop the investigation. That is the first move, and it is the hardest one, because the instinct when jealousy flares is to gather more. Check the phone, scan the history, reconstruct the timeline, ask the question that is actually not a question, but an accusation dressed in a neutral tone. The complex tells you this is due diligence, that a reasonable person would want to know, that information is protection. It is not. The investigation is the complex running its program. Every piece of evidence you collect feeds the machine that is already looking only for confirmation. So before you reach for the phone, before you frame the question designed to catch rather than understand, you pause. And in that pause, you ask one thing. What am I afraid this would confirm? Not what would it reveal about them? What would it confirm about me? Because that is where the actual answer lives. The elder sister was not investigating her sister's choices. She was confirming, again and again, something she already believed about herself, that she was too slow, too uncertain, too late, too much in her own way to deserve what the decisive one simply walked into. The phone, the history, the interrogation, none of it was about information. It was about permission to keep believing the thing she had already decided. Stop the investigation. Ask what you are actually afraid of finding out about yourself. The second move is to name what the jealousy is protecting with enough specificity that it stops being weather. There is a difference between saying, I feel insecure, and saying, I am afraid I am not as interesting as she is. There is a difference between, I feel threatened, and I am afraid that what he has built is the thing I wanted and quietly surrendered. The vague version keeps the feeling large and atmospheric, a cloud system you can live inside without ever locating the center. The specific version puts the thing on a table where you can actually look at it. Think of a man watching a colleague's career accelerate past his own. Every meeting where that colleague speaks with ease, every promotion that arrives without apparent effort, every casual confidence the man himself has never felt. He calls it resentment. But if he gets specific, what he finds is this: I am afraid that I stopped trying at exactly the moment the trying would have mattered, and I cannot stand watching someone who didn't stop. That is not the same as resentment. That is grief, dressed in resentment's clothes, because grief would require him to turn toward what he had given up. Specificity is what moves jealousy from a verdict about someone else into a map of your own interior. You cannot work with weather. You can work with a map. The third move is to name the paranoid pattern in the moment it is running. When jealousy constellates, when a situation gathers all the old material into readiness the way clouds gather before a storm, you will find evidence everywhere, because the complex has taken the wheel and it is not looking for truth, it is looking for confirmation. A slow reply becomes proof. A glance you didn't like becomes data. Something they said to someone else at a party 3 weeks ago becomes a thread that, once pulled, seems to connect to everything. This is not insight. This is the complex assimilating the environment, bending neutral events into the shape it already holds. The practice here is not to argue with the evidence. You cannot reason your way out of a complex by confronting each piece of evidence individually, because the complex will simply generate more. The practice is to name what is happening at the level of the pattern. I am looking for confirmation of something I already believe. You say it aloud if you can. You say it to yourself if that is all that is possible. That naming does not dissolve the feeling, but it interrupts the automation. It inserts the faintest wedge of distance between you and the machine. You are no longer inside the loop. You are observing it. That is not a small thing. That is the first moment of actual agency the complex has left you with. The fourth move is where the energy goes. Everything you have been pouring into monitoring the other person, the mental hours reconstructing timelines, rehearsing confrontations, scanning for inconsistencies, that is not nothing. That is your energy. The very attention that redirected could begin building the quality you believe you lack. A woman who is terrified she is not interesting enough spends hours imagining the conversations her partner might be having with someone more compelling. That same span of hours, turned inward, turned toward the work she has been putting off, the skill she decided years ago she had no talent for, the voice she has been waiting for permission to use, that is not hypothetical. That is a trade that is available to her right now, in the same 24 hours, with the same interior energy. Every act of self-development is a withdrawal of a projection, not because self-improvement makes you immune to jealousy. That is not the claim. The claim is more precise than that. When you actually become more of what you were afraid you weren't, the question of whether they are betraying you becomes less urgent. Not because the relationship changed, because you did. The wound that the jealousy was protecting is no longer quite so raw. It has been approached from the inside, which is the only direction from which it can actually be reached. These 4 moves are not a sequence you complete once. They are a practice you return to each time the complex activates, because the complex does not dissolve on the first pass. What changes over time is not the absence of jealousy, but your relationship to it. You begin to recognize the early signs before the loop has fully closed. You get faster at asking the real question. You get better at catching yourself in the paranoid pattern before you have spent a week inside it. The elder sister ran her loop for years without once touching the machine that was running it. She gathered evidence, she fell ill, she stayed away, she told herself the story that made everything external. The interruption was available to her at every point. It simply required her to stop looking at the screen and turn toward the projector. The thing that made you most jealous was pointing at the thing you most needed to develop. That's not a consolation. That's the instruction. So here is what this episode has been tracing, underneath all of it. Jealousy arrives dressed as a story about someone else, the rival, the threat, the partner who cannot be trusted. And that story feels urgent and real and completely outside you. But every story that begins with, "Look at what they're doing," is concealing a prior story. A story about something you have not yet allowed yourself to want, something you have not yet allowed yourself to be, something you have been standing outside of, arms crossed, calling it beneath you. The unconscious does not announce this. It doesn't hand you a clear memo. Instead, it makes you moody. It gives you an illness. It sends you to a health resort, while somewhere, in a place you decline to attend, a life you could have claimed is being celebrated without you. That is what happened to the elder sister. Her sister's wedding was happening. She had been invited. She did not go. And so she went elsewhere, far away, with a nervous stomach, and the feeling she would not name sat in a room she refused to enter, waiting. The kernel of all jealousy is lack of love, not their lack of love for you, a love you have not yet found your way to giving yourself, to your own wanting, your own longing, your own unlived life. That is what the jealousy was protecting. That is what it was pointing at all along. The letter is still there. You still have time to open it.